I eagerly anticipated the arrival of October 6th, 2023. For months, I had been working to have New York Times best-selling author Darrell Horne speak at our annual Sukkot dinner. You may remember I spoke about Darrell Horne last Kol Nidre in our aptly but chillingly titled book, People Love Dead Jews. After much anticipation, October 6th arrived, and our congregation filled our sukkah, excited to hear from our amazing guest. It was a phenomenal evening. One moment remains so vivid in my memory. As she neared the end of the conclusion of her remarks, Darrell Horne turned to the 30 BBYO teenagers present and said, "Do not be afraid, and do not hide your Judaism." There was so much to unpack about her presentation. I even have the signed copies of her books still sitting in my office. But we never had the chance to discuss her powerful words. Literally a few hours after our Sukkot event ended, Hamas launched the barbaric and heinous attack on Israel. At that moment, our world changed. A year later, we are still in a state of mourning, and 101 hostages are still held captive. We pray daily that the hostages will be returned home safely. We pray for the soldiers who are serving to protect our Jewish homeland, and we honor the memory of over 1,200 precious souls murdered on October 7th. Unfortunately, shortly after the attack on October 7th, anti-Semitism began to rise around the world and in our own country. People took mezuzot down from their front doors. Teenagers told me they began tucking their Magen David necklaces inside their shirts, and many people began hiding their Jewishness. While I cringed every time someone told me one of these stories, I unfortunately understood. How could we not be afraid? Fear seems to be everywhere. According to an American Jewish Congress report from February, 63% of Jews in America feel less secure than they did 1 year ago. And 78% said the attack of October 7th made them feel less safe as a Jew in America. Israel also has been in a state of fear. Tens of thousands of residents from the north and south are still evacuated from their homes. One teenager I met from Kibbutz Zikim on the Gaza border, while in Israel in February, said, "I never want to go back to my home." For the past year, Israelis have had to constantly live knowing where the closest bomb shelter is located. Families try to sleep at night, knowing their loved ones are held hostage in a tunnel in Gaza, and brave soldiers are risking their lives to find them and protect Israel. What a horrific way to live. Fear can be debilitating. It can paralyze us, but it does not have to. Isn't fear part of the Jewish DNA? During every Amidah of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we say, "Uvechen ten pachtecha." We are literally asking God to give us fear and to make us afraid. On the other hand, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, says over 80 times to not be afraid. In fact, we find this idea in the Exodus from Egypt, our national liberation story. Standing on the banks of the Sea of Reeds, with Pharaoh's army approaching, Moses tells the Israelites, "Al tira'u," have no fear. We seem to be receiving mixed messages. Should we be afraid or not? As Jews, we have wrestled with this question in the past. Numerous times this year, I've wondered what rabbis in 1948, 1967, and 1973 were saying. I'm sure their sermons were filled with messages of both hope and fear. In 1967, as the threat of war loomed over Israel, and Israel began digging mass graves, fearful of the impending attack, Rabbi Judah Nadich, one of the most influential conservative rabbis of the time, who also served as first advisor on Jewish affairs to General Eisenhower directly after World War II and the Holocaust, delivered numerous sermons at Park Avenue Synagogue, where he served as senior rabbi for 30 years, expressing his fear of the moment. During 1967, there was serious concern about Israel's future. On June 24th, 1967, 2 weeks after the conclusion of the Six-Day War, the Torah portion that Shabbat included the story of the 12 spies sent to scout the land. Of the 12, only Joshua and Caleb returned with confidence that the Israelites could succeed in settling the Promised Land, saying to the people, "The Lord is with us, do not fear them." Rabbi Nadich that Shabbat said, "The world was convinced but a few weeks ago that the people of Israel would be slaughtered. Even we, the Jews of America, were seized by great fear for the Jews of Israel. They did not want war, but if war would come, they were convinced that they would win. They would have to win. For them, there was no alternative. And to the amazement of the world, and to our own sheer joy, they did win." We, the Jewish people, have faced fear far too many times, and unfortunately, October 7th is now part of that expanding list in our history. But how we respond to those moments of fear is critical. Rabbi Judah Nadich highlights that in 1967, despite the incredible fear in Israel, our brothers and sisters were convinced they would win. Despite the fear they were experiencing, they acted with bravery to win that war. One of our great Torah commentators from the 15th century, Isaac Abarbanel, said, "One who enters battle thinking they are going to die is not an exalted hero. However, real greatness, real heroism, emerges when one acts contrary to their feelings." Israeli soldiers and citizens acted with this mentality in 1948, 1967, 1973, and numerous other times throughout Israel's 76-year history. Today, despite the uncertainty of the moment, we too must not become paralyzed by fear and learn to act differently than our mind suggests. Former Major League Baseball pitcher Bob Tewksbury and author of the book 90% Mental says that the key to athletic success is quieting the little man, the voice in your head that distracts you. Research and interview with professional athletes show the most successful athletes are able to ignore the thoughts in their mind so that they can perform despite the pressure of the moment and other distractions. We may not be asked to make a free throw in the final seconds of a championship game, but we must learn to think and act like those star athletes. As the entire Jewish community is consumed with fear, this way of thinking is more necessary than ever. The great Hasidic rabbi, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who was born in Ukraine in 1772, wrote a lot about fear. He is most well known for the song that many of our children sing at Jewish camps and youth group, Kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tsar me'od, va'ikar lo lefached klal. The entire world is a very narrow bridge, but the main thing is not to be afraid. I remember singing this song as a teen at the top of my lungs. Never once did it dawn on me that this message is very strange. You should never be afraid. Sometimes fear is an appropriate response and even necessary. Well, we've all been singing the song wrong. The lyrics that we know, lo lefached klal, the essence is not to fear at all, are not the original lyrics. The original lyric written by Rabbi Nachman includes a slight change that makes a giant difference in the meaning. Instead of lifached, fear, Rabbi Nachman originally wrote, Kol holam kulo, gesher sar me'od. Va'ikar, lo lahitpached klal. The whole world is like a very narrow bridge, But the main thing is to not act afraid. This tiny change of words dramatically alters the meaning of this entire song. We can be afraid. We do not have to will it away, but the most important thing is how we act when we are afraid. I would be lying to you if I told you that I have not felt scared over this past year. Just a few months ago, while walking home from shul, a car passed me, rolled down their window, and screamed, "Hail Hitler." This was the first time of me feeling fearful in our neighborhood. Would someone harm me during my weekly walk to shul? What about my children? For 10 years, that thought never entered my mind. Unfortunately, now it does, every Shabbat and holiday. I experienced a small taste of what Israelis face daily during the Federation's Solidarity mission to Israel, while partaking in a memorial ceremony for those murdered at the site of the Nova Music Festival. There was a gigantic explosion that made me jump out of my shoes and literally shook the ground. Thankfully, we learned quickly that it was Israeli tank fire, but I was definitely scared for those few seconds. Like you, I share the fear that we experience in our country and our extended family experiences daily in Israel. There is no doubt that this past year has been extremely painful for the Jewish community. But despite the trauma, loss, and fear, I am hopeful for the future. On the first Shabbat following October 7th, our congregation showed up. Our adversaries wanted us to be afraid and remain at home, but we refused, and 300 people packed our sanctuary for solidarity and to welcome in Shabbat. We refused to act afraid. Over 15 members of our congregation traveled to Israel on the Dallas Federation Solidarity Mission. Since October 7th, Jewish engagement has increased in this country. A recent survey by Jewish Federations of North America notes the surge after October 7th. They found of Jews somewhat or not engaged Jewishly prior to October 7th, a whopping 40% are now participating in Jewish life. The survey highlights that surge is found in all age demographics, but empty nesters is one of the groups who is most excited to re-engage with Jewish community. I see this in our own congregation as more people are attending programming and Shabbat. Young people continue to travel to Israel. This summer, despite the war, almost 14,000 young adults visited Israel with Birthright. Our students proudly wear shirts and jewelry with Hebrew or Jewish symbols. Despite the increase in anti-Semitism, Jewish engagement on college campuses spiked after October 7th. In November, I was able to join many from our congregation in Washington, D.C. at the largest pro-Israel rally in history. 300,000 pro-Israel supporters from around the country gathered on the National Mall. Despite some who initially removed mezuzot from their front door, most Jewish homes have kept the mezuzah where it belongs. While fear would tell us to do any of these things, or not to do any of these things, we refuse to act afraid. For this, I am hopeful for the future. The same is true in Israel. Soldiers who were exempt from army service felt that they must rejoin their units and voluntarily enlisted in the IDF. Since October 7th, volunteers have maintained the agricultural industry in the Gaza periphery. Daily, volunteers drive to the fields surrounding Gaza and pick the produce to sustain the kibbutzim in the area. Volunteers continue to care for the soldiers, families of hostages, and all of those who remain evacuated from their homes for over a year. Despite the backdrop of rocket attacks and the ongoing war with Hamas and Hezbollah, Israelis rise every morning, go to work and school, eat in cafes, and celebrate life's joys at bar mitzvahs and weddings. Fear is present, but they refuse to act afraid. I wish we would not have to live with fear in the year ahead, but we likely will. We don't have to will ourselves to ignore fear. Rather, we must use that fear to do something positive. How will you become more engaged in the Jewish community? Will you commit to coming to shul once a month? Will you enroll in an adult education class? Will you volunteer for a Jewish cause? Will you increase your support for a Jewish or Israeli nonprofit? Last Simchat Torah was defiled by the October 7th attack. We must reclaim the immense joy of the holiday. We need to sing and dance to celebrate Judaism and show our enemies that our spirit can never be defeated. We must act like we did in 1948, 1967, and 1973 by using fear to propel us to act with bravery and resilience. While the pain of this past year is present, I also carry with me hopefulness. Hope that the war will end and peace will be restored for Israel. Our hostages are returned home, and hope that we, the Jewish people, will emerge stronger, more connected, and better engaged. The original words of Rabbi Nachman's song should be our mantra. The whole world is like a very narrow bridge, but the main thing is to not act afraid. Fear cannot paralyze us. The essence is, how do we choose to live with our fear? Let us all learn to use our fear to become stronger and more connected Jews in 5785. Despite the many choices for a national anthem of the State of Israel, the leaders chose Hatikva, the hope. We must always live our life with the hope that tomorrow is better. We each have the opportunity to make that happen. Am Yisrael Chai.